ago, I was a senior here at Duke University, a public policy major. One day in an ethics class, the discussion came around to the moral implications of fat people in society. I don't quite remember the specifics of the conversation, but I do remember this. A classmate chimed in, and while kind of making eye contact with me from across the room, he said that fat people were lazy, disgusting, and unsightly. I sat there, stunned and then ashamed, but I knew he was just saying the quiet part out loud. To him and many others, when they see me, they see someone who is lazy, disgusting, and unsightly. I cried that night in my apartment over Enzo's pizza and wings, okay? I ate and ate and ate because, unbeknownst to me, I suffered from disordered eating, specifically binge eating. It was a deeply toxic cycle that started as a child and one that I would not even become aware of until I was in my mid-20s. But why did it take me so long to realize that my problem was way more than just calorie counting and portion control? Because the face of disordered eating doesn't look like me. And I think it's time we change that.
Instead, the face of disordered eating looks like me, or at least me 6+ years ago, a blonde sorority girl who was starving herself. I know the stereotypes: vain, superficial, self-centered. In reality, I was and am what my therapist once referred to as porous. I'm a sensitive individual prone to soaking in the vibes and undertones emitted around me. Social competition, jealousy, anxiety, pressure, expectation. In college, I felt all of these things, and I felt them so intensely, I didn't know what to do with it all. So my overwhelmed brain kicked in with a coping mechanism to distract me and give me a sense of control. Pretty soon, it morphed into a kind of addiction. Can all of that really be summed up by the clinical diagnosis? Anorexia, excessive food restriction. But at least my diagnosis is widely recognized. Too many of us have a limited understanding of what an eating disorder can actually look like. Anorexia is just one form.
There's also bulimia nervosa, where you overeat and then purge by vomiting, exercising, or fasting. There's binge eating disorder, where you feel a loss of control around food, so you eat large amounts in short periods of time. There's also orthorexia, where you have a compulsive preoccupation with clean eating. Add to that rumination disorder, laxative abuse, pica, and many other behaviors that fall on the spectrum. Think of disordered eating as an umbrella term that could involve any of the aforementioned behaviors. It's less stringent than that of an outright eating disorder. The criteria is less stringent than that of an outright eating disorder, which allows many more of us to evaluate our problematic and still very much dangerous eating behaviors.
All of these struggles are valid. No one disorder is worse than the other. And it is important that we shine a light on all of them to give language to those who may not know any other way to describe their suffering. For instance, a friend of mine with bulimia finally found the courage to tell her dad she had an eating disorder, only to be told, "I watched you eat an entire candy bar yesterday, so I find that hard to believe." He rejected her call for help because her disorder did not look the way he thought it should look. But I knew that she and I were just flip sides of the same coin. Both of us were struggling with feelings we felt ill-equipped to handle. Both of us were relying on maladaptive eating behaviors to do the job for us. I remember a group therapy session where we each answered the question, what does your eating disorder promise you? Answers ranged from, it promises I'm easy enough to love, to it promises I won't get raped again. That was when it dawned on me. Our core motivations had nothing to do with being thin.
One of the reasons why I did not seek help was because I always thought eating disorders were for white girls from those Lifetime movies. You know the ones, Perfect Body, For the Love of Nancy. Great movies, very informative, but also quite white. Now, I look back and wonder sometimes, whose story were they telling? Not mine. Definitely not black women, people of color, men, LGBTQ folks, old folks, fat folks. If we let the media tell it, only white women under the age of 30 are struggling. And that has real life implications for missed populations in disordered eating. In a 2011 study, researchers concluded that despite similar prevalence among races and ethnicities, people of color are still less likely to receive help for their issues.
In a 2014 study, men represented a quarter of those with anorexia, but had a higher risk of dying because they tended to be diagnosed later. Why? Because men don't get eating disorders. Athletes, picture of health, right? Well, in a 2003 Columbia University study, 38% of male athletes were at risk for bulimia, and over half of female athletes were at risk for anorexia.
So, media representation is skewed. Got it. But what about when you are in your doctor's office and you know you need help and the doctors can see you need help, but the best that they got is, instead of drinking apple juice, why not eat an apple? Okay. That type of attitude means fewer people seek help, get diagnosed, or get treated. Of all the doctors I visited in my childhood and early adulthood, no one ever bothered to just say, hey, what's really going on? I was over 200 pounds in middle school. By the time I hit freshman year of high school, I was well over 300 pounds. No one ever bothered to refer me to a therapist or a specialist. It was pretty much, girl, you're fat, go lose weight, which doesn't really get to the heart of the matter.
Although we've both struggled with different forms of this disease, Afton and I have noticed numerous parallels in our experiences. Both of us agree, disordered eating is not so much a choice as it is a triggered response. It's how those who struggle with perfectionism, have experienced trauma, or grapple with anxiety and depression cope with those difficult feelings. For instance, an overwhelming number of those who have experienced sexual assault later develop eating disorders as a way of processing pain that has gone unexpressed or been invalidated. The world is not always so kind to women, which is why many of us can be found trying to shrink ourselves into smaller and smaller targets, literally. This is not an issue that can be solved with cliche advice like, embrace your body, love the skin you're in.
I had binge eating disorder symptoms for years, didn't even know it. I would have some sort of triggering event that would leave me feeling disrespected, abandoned, or out of control. And then I would binge whatever I could get my hands on. And then came the crash. You're so stupid, so pathetic. What is wrong with you? You're already fat and you just got fatter. Then I would get on a diet to fix the binge, but it didn't fix anything. I would slip up, eat something I wasn't supposed to, And that would send me on into another binge. And on and on and on I go. So how did I get off the hamster wheel? What does recovery look like?
Recovery for me was a long process of unlearning the sexist people-pleasing tendencies that made me look to others to validate my self-worth. It was my discovery of the Duke Women's Studies program that gave me the vocabulary and big picture understanding I needed to recover. Feminist author Naomi Wolf writes, "A culture fixated on female thinness is not an obsession with female beauty, but an obsession with female obedience. Dieting is the most potent political sedative in women's history." In other words, it is a lot harder to fight for political and economic power when all of your energy is going towards obsessing over a thigh gap instead of an income gap. Feminist realizations like this made me really angry. Pretty soon, beating this disease was not just about getting my life back. It was about fighting the damn patriarchy.
My recovery came via a health scare in my mid-20s. The doctors had told me I was pre-diabetic and hypertensive. I was near 400 pounds and frankly tired. I had to admit that I had a problem. Not with food, not with weight, but with how I process my emotions. That was the hardest part. I had to learn how to slow myself down, to absorb my emotions, and develop an inner dialogue with myself whenever I felt compelled to overeat. Also, I had to come to grips with the fact that any diet that demanded perfection was always going to set me up for the next binge. And lastly, I learned self-compassion. I had to look at my childhood trauma with a new lens of love, forgiveness, and understanding.
Recovery is a varied process. It's not linear, and it looks different for different people. So let's drop the stereotypes about who struggles and what that struggle is supposed to look like.
It took me forever to realize I had a problem because I didn't fit the stereotype.
And it took me forever to accept help for my eating disorder because I was ashamed I did fit the stereotype.
So, stereotypes are dangerous, no matter where you are on the spectrum. They breed division and confusion, which causes more pain. So how do we stop the pain? Number one, more diversity in research and cultural competency among practitioners. Folks need to see caregivers who look like them and know that the caregivers have studied communities that look like them. Number two, increase access and decrease stigma surrounding mental health care, especially in underserved communities. Number three, create more diverse stories around disordered eating in the media. Everyone can benefit from knowing that there is no one type of victim and no singular cause. And lastly, stop body shaming each other. If you don't have anything nice to say, mind your own business.
Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.